think that housing market has never quite managed to defeat housing crisis is because they're actually one and the same character. Dun 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 dun! What? How could that be? How could housing market, one of the most beloved comic book heroes of all time, secretly be his own villain? Well, think about it. We know that housing market and housing crisis came to Earth at almost the exact same time. Way back when the comics started in the Industrial Revolution saga, characters were already referencing this mysterious villain. Coincidence? Maybe. But let's think about this. What are our heroes' powers? What does housing market actually do? Well, he distributes homes to people who can afford them. He encourages developers to develop more. He lends money to people so they can get on the property ladder. Hang on. Those are all the exact corollaries of the villain's powers. Distributing homes only to people who can afford them is just the other side of the coin of housing crisis power to raise rents and increase house prices. Encouraging developers to develop more is what led to the birth of gentrification, one of the series' darkest secondary evildoers. And lending money to buyers was the basis of the villain's plot in the 2008 storyline Crisis of Infinite Subprime Mortgages. And for the final proof, look no further than housing crisis's most dangerous weapon. The one thing that makes this villain feared, perhaps more than any other comic book bad guy. The homelessness ray. Since the comics began, the homelessness ray has claimed countless characters and struck fear into the hearts of countless more. But here's the thing, we already know that it's canon in the comics that there are more empty houses than there are homeless people. So if the characters in the comics really wanted to, they could end the homelessness ray overnight by just expropriating all his empty properties. But who is it who actually prevents them from doing that? Whose powers, although wielded in the name of justice and fairness, actually prevent properties from being given away for free even when there's an abundance? Isn't it awfully convenient that housing market's powers are never enough to defeat housing crisis? Well, in fact, they can't. You can't sell or build your way out of a crisis of distribution. So that means that all of housing market's allies, all those supporting characters, like the politicians who try to boost his powers of building new homes or encouraging first-time buyers, are approaching the problem all wrong. They're missing the key piece of evidence in the comics that there are enough homes already, so it's not a problem of supply, it's a problem of willpower. It's not about how many homes are made, it's about how they are made, i.e. as commodities to be bought and sold. And so housing crisis's evil villain powers are maintained by people's desire to keep the hero housing market around. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this is like a Batman Joker situation where the villain is like the dark reflection of the hero, or like a Spider-Man Venom thing where the villain is separate from the hero but was like born out of their dark side. I think the writers of the comic book series have crafted a far more intricate storyline for us where the hero and the villain are actually one and the same. The reason housing market can't defeat housing crisis is because market and crisis are the same thing. Now, before we go any further, I have to address the elephant in the room. There is another popular fan theory that my theory flies in the face of. Some fans of the comic believe that the real reason that housing market has never defeated housing crisis is because he simply hasn't been allowed to. We all know that our hero's awesome powers are kept in check by his green belt of regulation. And maybe, just maybe, he could defeat housing crisis if only he was allowed to take off the belt and unleash his true power. After all, as long as he wears it, his powers can wax and wane, and property developers can't always count on the stability of his heroism. But here's the thing, guys. That already happened in the comics. Over 100 years ago, during the Industrial Revolution saga, which was set in England, housing market's green belt of regulation was a lot weaker, only housing crisis wasn't defeated. If anything, he got even stronger, because most of the properties housing market was providing were dangerous, even deadly, being built mainly out of cheap materials. All this was covered in the work of huge comic book lover and nerd bro Frederick Engels. And for more on why the laissez-faire fanboys are reading the comics all wrong, here's awesome nerd and comic book genius Mexie to talk about the series' #1 sexiest character.
Thanks, Niall. I just get really worked up about this laissez-faire fanboy theory that shedding the green belt of regulation is the key to defeating housing crisis. This is pure fantasy. Not only did Nurbo Engels show us what happened when the belt was weakened during the Industrial Revolution saga, but the laissez-faire boys forget that we have a much more recent example. In issue 2016 in New York, housing market was seduced by the beguiling Airbnb, who claimed to be the secret weapon that housing market had been looking for. While the romance heated up, Airbnb convinced housing market to take long-term rentals off of the market, all while claiming that this was a great way to allow working class people to top up their income. The prices skyrocketed, people were forced out of their neighborhoods, gentrification's powers grew stronger, and more people were struck with the homelessness ray. Some super genius super fans, including the prolific Neil Smith, have uncovered that evil-doer gentrification's power comes from creating what are called rent gaps, which happen when the rent that landlords are receiving stagnates while the potential economic returns of that area increase. This creates an incentive for real estate capital to redevelop, to close the gap and cash in on all of that potential, which, as we know, pushes people out of their neighborhoods and makes housing less affordable. Well, there's a new theory that Airbnb is also having a sordid affair with gentrification, since Airbnb is helping gentrification to create new rent gaps out of nowhere and is also providing the means to close them. That is a terrifying power. When Airbnb is in town, there is an immediate gap between the rent that landlords are getting and the potential returns they could get from switching to short-term rentals. And they don't even have to invest in redevelopment or improvement. All they have to do is evict their current tenant or fail to keep their long-term rental on the market when their tenant moves on. This means that Airbnb is helping gentrification to take over and displace people from popular and up-and-coming or well-placed neighborhoods where instead of wealthier long-term residents coming in, there are tourists. The only way that people can stay long-term is if they're rich enough to offer the hosts more money than what they would get through Airbnb. So Airbnb is making this crisis global, creating gaps between what local landlords are receiving in rent and what they could earn if they welcomed well-off tourists from around the world. So local residents are increasingly being forced to pay housing prices set by global rather than local demand. There are a lot of people out protesting this, like in Barcelona and Amsterdam, but honestly, most people are just fully shipping housing market with Airbnb. And this is true despite the fact that the majority of people capitalizing on Airbnb's sharing economy powers are well-off white people. In New York's predominantly black neighborhoods, white hosts earn a dramatically larger share of revenue than their share of the population. Hosts were also found to be prone to reject African American guests, tying gentrification's powers with racial segregation. Over 1/4 of revenue is earned by commercial hosts who own multiple homes or 3 or more private room listings. Meanwhile, affordable housing continues to decrease, unions for hotel workers are being weakened and jobs lost. It's such a mess. I personally think that Airbnb is also in bed with housing crisis, which would make sense if they are in fact one and the same person, but one thing is clear. The green belt of regulation may be unequipped to defeat housing crisis, but when the belt hits the floor, it is utter chaos. We can't expect ditching the belt to save us. We need some fresh new ideas to defeat housing crisis.
Thanks, Mexie! Don't forget to check out her awesome channel when you're done here for all kinds of cool videos about communism, about comics. So, does all this mean that housing crisis is undefeatable? Will his reign of terror over the citizens of the world never cease? Not necessarily. I think if we accept my theory that housing crisis and housing market are one and the same, we give the characters in the comics a chance not just to defeat the bad guy, but to start a whole new and exciting franchise. Housing market draws his power from the property force, the psychic field that sustains private property in the minds of all free people. And fair warning, I am going to indulge in a little fan fiction here. The series has been running for hundreds of years, but how would we conclude it? How would we like to see it end? In my ideal ending to the series, housing market's allies learn the awful truth that he's secretly been the villain all along, and in a climactic showdown, they throw him into the vortex of the property force, killing housing market forever. But since housing crisis draws his evil power from poverty and homelessness, killing housing market and destroying the property force doesn't automatically make those things go away. Instead, all those other supporting characters have to come together and do what they always hoped their old hero would: build something new. What would happen to all the properties that Housing Market used to watch over? What would happen to all the little side characters, like the landlord?